The Moonlit Prophecy. The ancient castle of Virelia loomed beneath a sky swirling with storm clouds, the cold wind rustling through the forest like whispers from forgotten souls. Prince Alaric Duskbane stood on the battlements, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the gathering darkness, watching as the last light of day died away. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical burden, the crown on his head too heavy for his heart to bear. Beneath his steely exterior, the remnants of his past clawed at him. The endless wars, the bloodshed, and the prophecy. The Moonlit Prophecy. He had heard the whispers since childhood, the cryptic warnings passed down from the elders of the pack. A prophecy that had haunted his every step, even in his dreams. A royal wolf, bound by duty, and a human girl. A union that will save or destroy. His father's voice broke through the silence, weak but urgent from within the castle walls. "Alaric, come." King Lucian Duskbane's voice was strained, laced with pain. Alaric's jaw tightened. He knew what awaited him inside. The old king was dying, slowly, painfully. The blood moon eclipse was a mere week away, and with it, a storm of destiny that no one could control. The flickering light of candles bathed the chamber in an eerie glow. King Lucian lay propped up on a velvet-lined cushion, his once mighty frame now shrunken and frail. His face, once strong and unyielding, was now pale and drawn, the lines of age deepened by suffering. "Father." Alaric's voice was a low rasp as he approached the bed. Lucian's eyes flickered open, revealing the familiar haunted gaze that had always been both comforting and terrifying. His hand, trembling with age, reached for Alaric's. "The prophecy is real, Alaric." The king's voice was barely above a whisper. Alaric's stomach twisted at the words. He had heard them for years, but hearing them from his father's lips made them feel too real. "You must be ready," Lucian continued, his eyes darkening with the weight of his warning. "A human girl, she will be your ruin, or your salvation." Alaric clenched his jaw, the words of his father echoing in his mind. A human girl. The prophecy had always been vague, a riddle that no one could solve. He'd never imagined the day would come when it would be spoken aloud. "I'm ready, father." "I have to be," Alaric said, though he wasn't sure if he spoke of the prophecy or of his duty as heir. Lucian's hand fell limp, and he closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "The blood moon draws near, Alaric. It will change everything." Alaric stormed into the council room, his dark gaze fixed on the elders seated around the ancient oak table. The air was thick with tension, the murmurs of the council ceasing as he entered. The prophet of Virelia, a haggard old woman, looked up from her seat with eyes that seemed to see beyond the present. The moonlit prophecy has already begun to stir. Her voice was chilling, like the rustle of dead leaves. Alaric felt his pulse quicken, the familiar weight of prophecy hanging over him. The elders had always spoken in riddles, their cryptic warnings offering no solace, only fear. "There have been attacks," one elder said, his voice trembling. "Rogue wolves, disorganized but dangerous. They're growing bolder as the blood moon nears." Alaric's brow furrowed. "They're not just random packs. Someone is behind this." The prophet's eyes met his, piercing and knowing. "The human girl you seek will be at the center of it all." The scene shifts to the forest that bordered Virelia, where the tension is palpable. Alaric stood atop his horse, his gaze cutting through the dark trees, the air heavy with the scent of blood and fear. Rogue wolves, strange and wild, had been reported here, attacking villages and slaughtering livestock without warning. The full moon hung in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. But there was something more, something unnatural in the air. Alaric's senses were heightened, his wolf instincts pulsing beneath the surface. He caught a faint scent. Human. His eyes narrowed, his heart rate increasing. As he spurred his horse forward, the dark forest closing in around him like a living thing. He was getting closer. "This is where it all begins," Alaric muttered to himself. His heart pounded in his chest as a distant sound echoed through the trees, a woman's scream. Alaric's world suddenly blurred. His breath caught in his throat as vision after vision assaulted his mind. Flashes of a woman he'd never met. She had amethyst eyes that seemed to glow with power and terror. Her scream echoed in his ears, and his body was flooded with a sense of pain, raw and visceral. Alaric's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, his heart racing. "No!" he whispered, gripping his chest as if trying to rip the pain from his own heart. "Who is she?" The vision continued. A flash of fire, a girl falling, and then a blurred figure, a man, her savior? The visions cleared, and Alaric was left breathless on the ground, his body trembling. The mysterious girl was human, and she was dying. But why did he feel her pain so strongly? Why did he sense her soul? The night was thick with a heavy fog, the trees of the isolated forest towering like sentinels. Hidden deep within the woods, a small cottage made of stone and moss sat nestled in the shadow of towering oaks. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of herbs and dried flowers, and the only sound was the crackling of a fire in the hearth. Seraphina Vale paced the room restlessly, her bare feet brushing against the cool stone floor. Her wide amethyst eyes, the eyes that had once been a gift, a connection to the future, now darted around the room in panic. She was used to visions, the strange flashes of the future that came and went like waves crashing on a shore. But tonight, something was different. Her pulse quickened as the vision struck her again, unbidden, like a sudden storm tearing through the calm. The world around Seraphina distorted. Blinding light, followed by red fire. The trees were burning, falling to ash, their screams mingling with the howl of wolves. She was trapped, her hands bound by chains, the metal cutting into her wrists. Around her, the forest was consumed by flames, turning to nothing but a hellish inferno. Her chest tightened, and her breath came in sharp gasps as the vision blurred. Then, through the chaos, a figure emerged, a wolf, its massive form outlined by the fiery glow, its golden eyes locked onto hers. It wasn't an ordinary wolf. It was massive, powerful, and hungry. The fear coursed through her veins, her legs shaking. "No, please no," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the vision. The vision grew sharper, more violent. She saw Alaric, the prince, his face twisted in agony, his eyes full of torment. Was he there? Was he the one causing this? "This isn't just a vision." Seraphina gasped, clutching her head as the burning sensation in her temples increased. "This is real." The blind herbalist, an old woman who had taken Seraphina in years ago, sat across the room, sensing her distress. The herbalist's presence was one of calm amidst chaos, but even she could feel the heavy air, the sense of impending danger. Her weathered hands trembled as she stirred a bowl of herbs. The visions that bleed mean death follows. The herbalist's voice cracked, low and rasping as she spoke the warning. Seraphina closed her eyes, trying to steady herself as the visions threatened to overwhelm her. The blind woman's words echoed in her mind, a warning she had ignored too many times before. But this time, Seraphina couldn't ignore it. The vision of fire, chains, and wolves had left her shaken to her core. Death wasn't a possibility, it was an inevitability. Seraphina stumbled back to the window, staring into the dark forest that stretched before her. It was the only world she knew, the only place she had ever felt safe. But now it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. Her chest tightened as the vision of fire swam before her again, its relentless destruction. She had to escape. Without thinking, Seraphina grabbed the small satchel she kept by the door, her fingers trembling as she packed the few belongings she could carry. She had no plan, no clear direction, but the vision was clear. She had to leave. "I can't stay here," she whispered to herself, fear curling deep in her gut. I don't know what's coming, but I can't face it alone. Seraphina stepped out into the night, the chill air biting at her skin. The path was unclear, the forest dark and unfamiliar, but her instincts pushed her forward. She was running from something, though she wasn't sure if she was running from the wolves or the prophecy, or both. The crackling of leaves beneath her boots was the only sound as she hurried through the thick woods, her heart pounding in her chest. Danger was near. As she moved, she felt the weight of her gift pressing down on her, like an invisible force guiding her steps. The visions were never wrong, but for once she wished they were. She wished she could outrun what was coming, outrun the fate that had already been written for her. But the forest around her seemed to close in. The air grew denser, the trees more twisted, as though she were being drawn towards something or someone. And then she saw it, a wolf, massive and dark, standing at the edge of the path ahead of her. Its eyes glinted like molten gold, its fur bristling in the moonlight. The creature was unmoving, watching her with an intensity that froze her in place. Her breath hitched, and instinctively she took a step back. The wolf did not snarl. It did not growl. It simply bowed its head, as if acknowledging her presence. The act was strange, unexpected. Why is it bowing? Seraphina thought, her mind reeling with confusion and fear. She had never heard of such a thing. A wolf in all its ferocity, bowing to a human? The thick moonlight bathed the world in an eerie glow, casting long shadows over the dense forest. The night was deceptively peaceful, but within its depths, danger lurked, waiting for the right moment to strike. The border patrol moved quietly through the trees, their eyes sharp, but nothing unusual had crossed their path until now. Prince Alaric Duskbane, leading the patrol, felt the familiar tension in the air. It was a feeling he couldn't quite shake, an unsettled instinct that gnawed at him, telling him something was wrong. He slowed his horse, the hooves muffled by the soft dirt beneath them. His senses were heightened, the cool night air filling his lungs as he scanned the surroundings. A flash of movement caught his attention, and his eyes narrowed. Alaric dismounted swiftly, his armor glinting faintly in the moonlight. His clawed hand, now instinctively extending due to his werewolf heritage, brushed through the underbrush. The smell of blood hit him immediately. "This way," he growled to his guards, his voice low and commanding. The patrol followed him into the woods, where the scent of fresh blood grew stronger, sharper. The trees parted ahead, and there, lying motionless on the forest floor, was a woman. Her body was bruised and bloodied, a series of deep claw marks marring her skin. Her long, tangled hair lay around her, dark against the pale ground, and her breathing was shallow, strained. Seraphina. His heart skipped at the thought of her name, even though he didn't yet know her. The vision from earlier, the girl with the amethyst eyes, screamed his name. This was her. He kneeled beside her, his gloved hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. As his skin made contact with hers, something strange and unexplainable happened. A sudden pulse of raw energy surged between them, hot, electric, and unyielding. It wasn't the kind of power he was used to. It was intangible, like the air itself had caught fire. What? Alaric's breath hitched. His senses exploded with images, flashes of visions, a woman, the forest burning, and a bond so intense it almost crushed him. The pulse faded as quickly as it came, but Alaric was left shaken, his mind spinning. It had been as though their souls had touched. He pulled his hand back, feeling cold sweat on his brow despite the heat of the moment. She was barely conscious, her face contorted in pain, but her eyelids fluttered as her body trembled. Slowly, Seraphina's eyes opened, and the world seemed to shift around her. The sky above was faintly lit by the red blood moon, its glow casting a haunting hue over everything. She felt the strong arms beneath her, his arms, holding her securely, keeping her from falling. She could smell the forest, and something else, wild, primal. Her voice was weak, but it trembled with recognition as she whispered, You're him, the wolf in my dreams." Alaric froze. Her words were a shock to him, a revelation. He had seen her in his visions as well. But hearing her speak of him, knowing that she too had felt the strange connection between them, it was unnerving. "The wolf in your dreams." Alaric repeated, his voice low, his heart hammering. "What do you mean?" She blinked, her gaze clouded by confusion and pain, but also recognition. "I don't know," she whispered, "but it's you. I saw you in the fire in my dreams. Your eyes, they're the same. You were there in the flames." The ground beneath them seemed to shift, and for a moment the air felt charged with an energy that neither of them could explain. The connection was undeniable, unshakable. Before Alaric could ask her more, his patrol was already gathering around them, their eyes filled with suspicion. He could already feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. He could not allow the others to see this strange, unexplainable encounter. "We need to go. Now." His command was sharp, and without waiting for a response, he scooped Seraphina into his arms. Her body felt light against his, and for a moment he forgot everything else. There was only her, only the feel of her in his arms, and the overwhelming pull of the bond between them. As he began to walk swiftly toward the castle, his guards following in confusion, Alaric's thoughts raced. What was happening? This woman, this seer, was connected to him in a way that no one could understand. The Moonlit prophecy was clear. She could either save or destroy his people. But how could he trust someone he didn't even know? And yet his instincts, his wolf's instincts, were telling him something else. This woman was important, in ways that had yet to unfold. Later that night, deep within the confines of his castle, Alaric stood before a large mirror, his chest bare as he began to unbutton his tunic. The blood-orange moon shone brightly outside the tall windows, its eerie glow casting an unnatural light across the room. Seraphina was asleep, her wounds tended to by the castle healers. He had hidden her away in his chambers, away from prying eyes. The tension in his chest hadn't eased, and now, as he stood alone, he could feel that something had shifted, something far beyond his control. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his chest. It felt like something was carving into him. Alaric stumbled back, his breath catching as he watched in horror. A glowing sigil appeared on his chest, a strange, intricate mark, burning into his skin like a brand. It was her mark, the Seer's sigil. The castle's great hall was filled with the murmurs of the council, a place where ancient traditions and unsettling politics collided. Alaric Duskbane stood at the head of the table, his thoughts heavy with the weight of the prophecy. As the council members gathered, he could feel their eyes on him, their judgment palpable. Seraphina sat at the far end, carefully hidden beneath the guise of a rescued traveler, her hair neatly braided and her face carefully concealed behind a veil. She played her part well, but every glance she threw toward Alaric was heavy with the unspoken connection they shared. Her heart raced, her pulse pounding as she tried to blend into the shadows, pretending to be just another stranger under the prince's protection. But Alaric could sense her unease. He couldn't explain the bond, but it was there, undeniable. Her emotions were his, just as his were hers. The air was thick with tension as the council members debated the situation at hand. Rogue wolves ravaging the border villages, rumors of a blood moon eclipse, and now, this strange girl they'd found in the woods. The elders murmured among themselves, casting suspicious glances at Seraphina. Lady Talia, a noblewoman with a sharp tongue and a sharper gaze, was the first to speak out. Her voice dripped with suspicion. "This girl, we don't know her, and yet the prince has brought her into the heart of the kingdom. What if she's a spy? What if she's here to destroy us?" Her eyes darted toward Seraphina, who sat unnaturally still, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Enough, Lady Talia!" Alaric snapped, his voice carrying the weight of command. Seraphina is under my protection. I trust her." Talia narrowed her eyes, but the others were silent, their mistrust simmering beneath the surface. Alaric could feel the unease growing. He didn't care what the council thought. They were just a collection of old men and women clinging to outdated traditions. But he couldn't deny that he needed their support in the coming days. The blood moon was nearing, and everything hinged on the prophecy on Seraphina. Seraphina shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers twitching with the urge to stand and flee. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially not from people whose lives could be destroyed by a single wrong move. Her mind raced, her memories of the vision from earlier, Alaric's name, echoing in her thoughts. She could still feel his touch, the surge of energy between them. But it was so much more than that, his pain, his struggles, his hopes all swirling in a storm she couldn't control. Her heart ached as the suspicion grew in the room. They saw her as an outsider, a threat, a pawn in a much larger game. She wasn't here by choice. She had no power in this world. And yet, something deep within her told her that she had a role to play. Far from the castle, in a dark forest drenched in shadows, Magnar Bloodfang paced in his camp. His eyes were cold, calculating the kind of gaze that could freeze blood. His wolf form, a hulking beast of shadow and fury, was always within arm's reach, the feral nature barely contained beneath his skin. Once a noble alpha, now a rogue, exiled for his sins, Magnar had made it his life's mission to break the curse that bound him. The prophecy was the key, and Seraphina Vale was the final piece of the puzzle. His army was growing, rogue wolves and outcasts who had gathered to serve him. They were loyal only to their own survival, but Magnar had what they wanted: power. He had promised them a kingdom once he claimed it, and with Seraphina at his side he would get it. A figure emerged from the darkness, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Nyxra, known as the Hollow-Eyed, was a sorceress who had crossed paths with Magnar many years ago. Her power was dark, rooted in forbidden magic that only the bravest dared to touch. Her soul was broken, her past lost in the shadows, but her ambitions were clear: power, control, and vengeance. She walked with purpose, her black cloak trailing behind her as she approached Magnar's tent. The camp grew silent as she passed, the air thick with the scent of danger. "Magnar," she said in a voice as cold as the grave, "I have seen your future, and I have brought you what you seek." Magnar's lips curled into a sneer. "You found the girl." Nyxra's lips quirked into a wicked smile as she nodded, her hollow eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "Not just the girl. I found the key to your curse and the end of the prince's reign." She raised her hands, and a dark, swirling vision began to unfold before Magnar's eyes. The image was vivid, an unmistakable glimpse of the future. Magnar's eyes widened in shock and fury. "No," he snarled, his fists clenching at his sides. This is not possible." Nyxra's smile deepened, knowing that she had planted the seed of doubt in his heart. "It's all within your grasp, Magnar," she whispered. "The crown, the girl, and the vengeance you've craved for so long. All you need to do is claim them." As the vision faded, Magnar's mind was filled with a single thought: "I will not let this happen. She will be mine, and Alaric will die." In the vision, Seraphina stood crowned, her hands raised to the heavens in triumph, her eyes glowing with an unnatural power. And at her feet, Alaric Duskbane lay dead, his body broken and lifeless. The moon hung low in the sky, its silver light casting an eerie glow over the Virelian castle. Alaric stood at the castle's edge, staring out into the darkened woods, his thoughts restless. The tension between him and Seraphina had only grown since their fateful meeting. But it was more than just an attraction. It was a connection he couldn't explain. His heart pulled toward her, as though he had been tethered to her by invisible strings since the moment they first met. But he knew better than to indulge in the forbidden. Duty came first. He was the prince, heir to a throne shadowed by prophecy. Yet Seraphina was different. Clever, defiant, unyielding. She saw through him in a way no one else could. Inside the castle walls, Seraphina spent her days hidden from the council's eyes, but not from Alaric's. The prince sought her out more often than he'd care to admit, drawn by something intangible, a spark, a curiosity that had long been extinguished in his heart. Alaric found himself sitting with her on countless occasions, speaking of things he dared not share with anyone else. She challenged him, and for the first time in years he welcomed it. "You believe in the prophecy, don't you?" Seraphina asked one evening, her gaze penetrating as she stared across the room. Alaric stiffened, but didn't answer immediately. "I have to." His voice was clipped, but it betrayed the uncertainty swirling within him. "My people depend on me." Seraphina smiled softly, the corner of her lips curling with a hint of rebellion. "What if the prophecy is a lie?" Her words hit him like a sudden gust of wind. What if? He had spent his entire life living in the shadow of a prophecy. To question it felt like sacrilege, yet her voice had a way of making the impossible seem like an option. "Then," he murmured, his fingers brushing against hers, "we'll rewrite it." The full moon rose high that night, its light washing over the ancient stones that lay scattered throughout the castle grounds. These stones, relics of a forgotten age, were said to hold immense power that only the most attuned could tap into. Seraphina stood before one of them, her hands trembling slightly as the moonlight bathed her. Alaric stood behind her, watching closely as she reached out to touch the stone. There was a strange hum, a low vibration beneath her fingers, and then vision. A flood of images burst into her mind like shards of glass. She was no longer standing in the castle. Instead, she found herself standing in a forgotten past, surrounded by a grand, ancient city. Magner. She saw him, young, fierce, and ruling Virelia before he became the monster he was now. The vision swirled violently, and she saw betrayal. The royal family torn apart, Alaric's ancestors slaughtered. Magner had ruined everything, seeking vengeance for something long forgotten. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as she stumbled backward, her vision clouded with the images of fire and blood. "It can't be true." But it was. The weight of it crashed over her, and she gasped for breath. Alaric watched in silence as Seraphina's body jerked with the force of the vision. She gasped, her breath shallow, as if the very power of the vision had shaken her to her core. He reached out, pulling her close as her body swayed. "Seraphina, what did you see?" His voice was tight with concern, but also something deeper, something he hadn't fully admitted to himself. "Fear." "Magner," her voice trembled. "He was once your king, Alaric. Before he turned on your family, he wanted revenge, and he wanted my power." Alaric's breath caught in his throat. He had heard the whispers, the rumors of Magner's betrayal, but he never believed it could be true. To think that the man who had once ruled Virelia was now an enemy of his kingdom, and that Seraphina's power might be the key to breaking the curse that bound him, was a revelation too horrific to grasp fully. "We need to stop him," Seraphina whispered, her voice shaking but determined. "Before he comes for me, before he comes for you." As the ritual ended, Seraphina stepped away from the stone, her hand still trembling. The vision had shown her the past, but it had also shown her something more, a connection between herself and Alaric. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face, but there was something different in the air now, a subtle, almost magnetic pull between them. Alaric, too, felt it in awakening. His wolf stirred, restless beneath the surface. The bond between them was no longer just emotional, it was primal, ancient, and he could feel it in his very blood. "I don't understand," he muttered under his breath, his hand instinctively brushing his chest, where the sigil had appeared days before. Seraphina looked up at him, her expression softening with understanding. "I think I do." The air crackled with an unspoken tension, and for a brief moment everything paused. Alaric's gaze lingered on her lips, his wolf instinct rising within him. He could almost feel her pulse beneath his fingertips. Suddenly, pain shot through him, sharp, burning, and fierce. His transformation had already begun. As Alaric's vision blurred, his gaze locked onto Seraphina, and he saw it, the exact vision that had haunted her moments ago. Alaric biting her, his wolfish form taking control, and her screaming in agony as the pain from his bite consumed her. He staggered back, gasping for air, his heart racing. "No," he growled. "I won't hurt you, Seraphina." But as the moonlight bathed him, he realized he couldn't deny it any longer. The prophecy was real, and so was the danger. The night sky was still, holding its breath as the full moon bathed the land in an eerie glow. In the Virelian castle, Alaric stood on the balcony of his chambers, staring out over the forest. His thoughts, like the dark shadows of the trees, were restless, consumed by the weight of the prophecy that bound him to Seraphina. The seer had stirred something within him. But was it truly love, or was it just the pull of fate, the inevitable force of prophecy, dragging them toward an uncertain end? His fingers curled into fists, gripping the stone railing. He had to keep his distance. His people needed him, and the prophecy was a heavy chain that could not be ignored. "You cannot choose who you love, Alaric." His own words haunted him, and he grimaced, turning away from the night. Meanwhile, in a world of shadow and fog, Seraphina stood alone, her breath ragged in the thick, suffocating air. She was back in that nightmare realm, the same place where she had faced her deepest fears, where the voices of the past and future collided. Suddenly, from the swirling darkness, a figure emerged, a woman draped in black, her eyes hollow like a void. "Nyxra." "You again!" Seraphina spat, her heart pounding in her chest. Nyxra's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You cannot escape me, Seer." Seraphina clenched her fists, her voice low and steady. "What do you want from me?" Nyxra took a step forward, her presence suffocating, and her words slid like poison into Seraphina's mind. "The prince's love is your leash, my dear. You think you are free, but the prophecy is what will bind you." Seraphina recoiled at the implication, but Nyxra's gaze pierced her. "You'll be nothing but a pawn in this game. His love will be your cage. You cannot escape it." Seraphina's pulse quickened, her breath catching in her throat. Was Nyxra right? Was everything she felt for Alaric simply a twisted manipulation of fate? The thought stung, but she refused to believe it. She couldn't. The vision of Nyxra's words lingered in Seraphina's mind as she walked down the hall of the castle, her steps quiet but purposeful. But before she could reach the safety of her chambers, she felt it, an unnatural presence, an unseen hand that brushed against her skin. A sudden flash of movement caught her eye, a shadow, too quick to register. Then the pain. A sharp, stabbing force pierced her side, and she gasped, clutching at the wound as she stumbled. Blood soaked her fingers, dark and warm. She turned, ready to defend herself, but the assassin was already disappearing into the shadows. "No!" She shouted, but the castle was eerily quiet. Her breath quickened, panic rising in her chest as she pressed her hand against the wound, trying to stop the flow of blood. But something else was happening, visions. The world spun around her, her consciousness slipping between the physical world and the realm of the past. She saw it, a scene of chaos and bloodshed, the Blood Moon War, rogues, wolves clashing in the night, the destruction of the royal family, the battle for the throne. She saw Alaric, his form strong, but his eyes clouded with rage and grief. She saw Magner, his teeth bared, his rage consuming him as he led the charge against Virelia. Seraphina stumbled to her feet, her head pounding as the vision receded. The pain from the wound was unbearable, but she forced herself to keep moving. She couldn't stay here, not with the assassins still lurking in the shadows. She ran through the halls, her heart pounding in her chest. Her escape was almost in reach when she heard it. Footsteps, too many, coming from all directions. She was trapped. Suddenly, a figure appeared before her, tall and menacing. A rogue wolf, his eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. Seraphina backed away, her breath shallow. "Who are you?" The rogue said nothing, only lunged at her. But before she could react, something pulled at her. Alaric's presence. She felt it, even from a distance. His energy, his familiar strength, flared to life within her. But it wasn't enough. She struggled, panic surging within her as she realized she had no escape. Suddenly, from the darkness beyond, a new figure stepped forward. Magner. His tall frame loomed over the rogues, and his cold gaze locked onto Seraphina. His lips curled into a dangerous smile as he took a slow step forward. "You cannot run forever, Seer." Seraphina's heart pounded, her blood running cold. Magner was here. The nightmare was no longer just a vision, it was a reality. She barely had time to react before a surge of power slammed into her, knocking the air from her lungs. "Alaric!" she whispered, her vision fading as the world around her went black. The air was thick with the scent of earth and blood as Seraphina stirred, her vision swimming in and out of focus. The ground beneath her was cold, unforgiving. A cruel mist swirled around her, and the only sound that pierced the silence was the rhythmic thudding of her pulse in her ears. She groaned, trying to push herself up, but her body was weak, every movement a painful reminder of the assault she had just endured. And then she saw them, rogues, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness, surrounding her. Magner stepped into the clearing, his towering figure emerging from the shadows like some dark force of nature. His eyes glinted with malice, and the cruel smile on his lips made Seraphina's stomach twist with dread. "You're mine now, Seer," he growled, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. Seraphina tried to push herself to her feet, but her legs trembled beneath her. Her breaths were ragged, the panic rising in her chest like an uncontrollable storm. "What do you want with me?" she spat, her voice defiant despite the fear she felt. Magner's eyes darkened. "You're the key, girl, the one who can break my curse. And when I'm done with you, I'll have Virelia and your precious prince at my feet." The word stung. The idea of Alaric, her prince, her love, falling under Magner's control was too much to bear. But there was more, something darker behind his words, something Seraphina couldn't yet comprehend. As if sensing her confusion, Magner's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Alaric's weakness is his love for you, and that's exactly what will destroy him." Seraphina's heart skipped a beat. His words hit too close to home. Was it true? Was she the key to his destruction? To the destruction of everything she had come to care for? Before she could respond, a distant sound echoed through the forest, a low, rumbling growl that reverberated in the air, sending a chill down her spine. The air grew heavier, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, as though they were alive. And then from the darkened trees it emerged. Alaric. But it wasn't the prince she had come to know. It was the wolf, fully transformed, his body massive and powerful, covered in dark fur that shimmered like obsidian. His eyes burned with a deep, blood-red glow, and his massive jaws parted, showing off rows of sharp teeth. Seraphina's breath hitched in her throat. It was Alaric, but something was different. He was consumed, lost to the beast inside him. Magner's laughter echoed in the clearing. "Ah, there he is, the prince himself, come to save his little Seer." Alaric growled, his lips pulling back into a snarl. "Stay away from her." His voice was guttural, distorted by his wolf form, but there was no mistaking the anger that laced his words. Without warning, Alaric lunged at Magner, the ground shaking beneath his massive paws. Teeth clashed with claws, the sound of bones cracking and the screams of both beasts filling the air. The fight was fierce. Alaric and Magner were evenly matched in strength, but the rage that burned in Alaric's eyes made him unpredictable, dangerous. Seraphina could only watch in horror as they collided, blood and fur flying with every brutal strike. The world around her seemed to fade as she became consumed with the chaos of the battle. The two wolves were a blur of motion, an unstoppable force of nature. Magner was ruthless, his claws raking across Alaric's side, but Alaric fought back with an intensity that sent shockwaves through the forest. He was no longer the prince she had once known. This was the beast, the monster that had been unleashed by the prophecy. Seraphina's heart raced as she watched, her chest tightening with each savage blow. She wanted to scream, to stop them both, but the words caught in her throat. This wasn't just a fight for her life, it was a battle for Virelia, for everything that was at stake. But then something changed. Alaric's body shuddered, his movements growing erratic. His eyes glowed brighter, the blood-red hue almost blinding. The wolf within him was losing control. He was slipping further and further into the darkness. Alaric! Seraphina screamed, her voice desperate. She could feel the pull of their bond, the connection between them that stretched across the battlefield. He was still there, somewhere. She knew he was, but it was too late. Alaric lunged, his fangs sinking deep into Magner's shoulder. Magner roared, thrashing violently, but Alaric didn't relent. His body trembled with rage, a fury that was wild and uncontrollable. And then, as Alaric's teeth found the flesh of Magner's throat, he turned. Alaric's eyes locked onto Seraphina, his gaze wild, unfocused. And then, with a sickening growl, he snarled. "No." Seraphina cried, taking a step back as Alaric lunged toward her. The darkness in his eyes sent a surge of fear through her chest. He was no longer her Alaric. He was a monster. Just as Alaric's fangs neared her neck, the blood-red glow in his eyes faltered, flickering, just for a moment. In that instant, a flash of silver pierced through the crimson, a glimmer of recognition in his gaze. "Alaric!" Seraphina whispered, her voice soft but desperate, her heart pounding in her chest. "Come back to me." For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The wolf's movements slowed, and his eyes flickered, the red dimming to a silvery hue. The night sky stretched above them, an expanse of ink-black velvet dotted with stars that flickered like distant flames. But tonight there was something ominous in the air, something heavy, as though the very heavens were holding their breath. The blood moon was rising. Seraphina stood at the edge of the ruins of the old castle, her heart hammering in her chest. The eclipse had begun, and with it, the prophecy that had haunted her every step for so long was finally coming to life. The sky above her was bleeding, the moon turning a deep, unnatural red as the dark ritual that Nyxra had set in motion began to unfold. In the distance, the howls of Magner's army echoed through the night, a sound full of malice and bloodlust. Werewolves, and the humans who had joined their ranks, stood ready, an uneasy alliance forged by the common goal of stopping the curse that had nearly torn their world apart. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat as she glanced at Alaric, who stood beside her. His wolf form, towering and powerful, shimmered with a dark energy that made her shiver. Their bond, the connection that had started as something distant and barely understood, had deepened since that fateful day when he had saved her. But tonight, it was more than that. It was their strength, their unity, that would either save them all or tear them apart. "We have to stop her," Alaric growled, his voice low and strained, as though he were fighting the beast inside him with every word. "She won't stop until she's taken everything from us." Seraphina nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "We will stop her. Together." They were a united front now, not just against Nyxra and Magner, but against the very prophecy that had tried to control their fates. Seraphina's hand found Alaric's, her fingers tightening around his as the moon rose higher, its light casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. In that moment, Seraphina realized something that sent a wave of cold dread through her chest. The prophecy wasn't about death. It was about choice. Her heart pounded, the weight of the realization crashing over her. She could feel the pull of the magic in the air, the suffocating pressure of fate bearing down on her shoulders. But it wasn't just the end they were fighting for. It was the beginning, the freedom to choose their own path. The sound of footsteps grew louder as Magnar's army advanced, his soldiers, both human and werewolf, pushing forward with a force that was almost overwhelming. But Seraphina stood tall, her gaze unwavering as she glanced over her shoulder at the humans and werewolves who stood beside her, ready to fight. "This is it," she whispered to Alaric. "We win tonight." And with that, the battle began. The clash of steel against steel, the savage roars of werewolves, and the shrieks of the wounded filled the air as the two armies collided. Seraphina's heart raced, the adrenaline pumping through her veins, urging her to fight for freedom, for love, for everything they had built together. She fought with ferocity, her sword flashing in the moonlight as she cut down enemies, her movements fluid and swift. But the more she fought, the more she realized that this was not just about defeating Magnar's army. This was about breaking the chains of fate, the curse that had bound them all. "Alaric!" she cried, her voice rising above the chaos. "We need to stop Nyxra. She's the key." Alaric was by her side in an instant, his wolf form a terrifying blur of claws and teeth. He lunged at the nearest enemy, his fangs sinking into the flesh of a rogue. The bond between them pulsed, stronger than ever. They fought together, side by side, their movements synchronized as if they had always been in sync. And in that moment, Seraphina knew that they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other, for the love they had built against all odds. As the battle raged on, Seraphina's eyes finally found Nyxra, the dark sorceress who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. Nyxra stood at the heart of the ruins, surrounded by dark magic, her hands raised as she chanted words of power that made the air crackle with energy. "It's over, Nyxra!" Seraphina shouted, her voice full of defiance as she charged toward her. But Nyxra merely smiled, her lips curling into a wicked grin. "You think you can stop this? You, the girl who will die in my ritual. You are nothing but a pawn in the prophecies game." Seraphina's heart clenched, but she didn't stop. "No, Nyxra, I am not your pawn. This is my choice." With a final defiant roar, Seraphina threw herself between Alaric and Magnar as they clashed in the center of the battlefield. The prophecy, the end of all things, the death that had loomed over them both, was not meant to be fulfilled. She would not let it end this way. "No." Alaric shouted, his voice full of rage and pain, his wolf form charging forward. "Seraphina, move." But Seraphina stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest as she gazed at Alaric, her love, her soul intertwined with his. The moon overhead seemed to glow brighter, casting everything in an almost blinding light. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, Alaric made his choice. He spared Magnar. The magic that had bound him, the curse that had controlled him, shattered in that instant. Magnar stumbled, his dark power crumbling away. The curse was broken. But before they could even process the shift in the tide of battle, the sky cracked open, the moon turning silver as a pulse of raw power surged through the battlefield. Nyxra screamed, her voice high-pitched and full of fury as the magic she had woven for centuries turned back on her. Seraphina watched in horror as Nyxra's body began to crack, the magic consuming her from the inside out. Her body trembled as the force of the magic spiraled, but there was no escape. No. Nyxra screamed again, her voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the magic. And then the magic consumed her completely. The light of the silver moon bathed the land in a tranquil glow, its soft radiance casting long shadows across the newly united kingdom. The war that had torn the world asunder now seemed like a distant memory, and in its place was peace, hard-won, fragile but real. Alaric stood tall before the assembled crowd, his crown heavy on his brow. The weight of it was not just the gold or jewels, but the responsibility it symbolized. The crown of the Virelia throne had always been a symbol of power, but now, under the blood moon's fading light, it felt like a beacon, a promise of a future born from struggle and sacrifice. "King Alaric of 2 worlds!" the high priest called, his voice resounding through the courtyard. The crowd cheered, a mix of humans and werewolves united under one banner. Their faces, once filled with fear and hatred, now glowed with hope. The sound of celebration rang through the air, a sound that Alaric had never thought he would hear, especially not after everything they had been through. But now it was their reality. Beside him, Seraphina stood as his equal. Her eyes, those glowing eyes that had once held only fear of the future, now shone with a newfound clarity. She was no longer just the girl of the prophecy. She was a queen, a seer, the bridge between the 2 worlds that had once been enemies. She had rewritten her fate, just as she had rewritten the prophecy. Seraphina's heart swelled as she watched Alaric raise his hand to the heavens, the crown settling into place. She had seen this moment in her visions, seen the path that led them here. But it was her hand that had shaped the prophecy in the end. She had freed them both from the grip of destiny. Alaric turned toward her, and for the first time, the weight of his wolf form seemed to melt away. He was not just the fierce alpha. He was the man who had fought beside her, the one who had loved her, the one who had chosen her despite everything that had been written in the stars. "Together," he whispered, his voice carrying only to her. She nodded, her heart beating in perfect sync with his. Together. As the crowd erupted into cheers, she could feel the shift inside her, the new power she held. Her visions, once haunting and uncontrollable, were now her gift. She could see the world in its fullest form, its secrets laid bare, and it no longer terrified her. It was part of her now, and she would use it to guide, to lead, and to help both werewolves and humans understand one another. Seraphina stepped forward, her crown resting delicately on her brow. The soft silver gleam of the crown reflected the moonlight, marking her as not just a queen but a seer, the voice of a new era. She stood before the council, her eyes sweeping over the faces of those who had once feared her, even hated her. But now they saw her for what she truly was, a leader who could shape their world with both her vision and heart. "The prophecy is not what it once was," Seraphina declared, her voice steady and strong. She paused, taking in a deep breath, before continuing, her hands raised to the heavens. "We were never meant to destroy each other. We were born to change the world, together." Her words reverberated through the air, and as the final syllables fell from her lips, the prophecy was rewritten by her hand in her words. No longer would the world be bound by the chains of fate. No longer would they be controlled by the horrors of the past. Alaric moved to her side, his arm sliding around her waist as he pulled her close. Together, they stood at the front of the crowd, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. They had both been changed by the events that had unfolded, shaped by war, by love, and by the bond they shared. Seraphina could feel the calm now, something she had never known before. She was not haunted by her visions. She was no longer terrified of the future. For the first time in her life, she was home. And with Alaric by her side, she knew that their reign would not just be a new chapter for their kingdom. It would be the beginning of a new era. The werewolves and humans, once enemies, now stood together, united under the banner of their shared future. It wasn't just Alaric's crown that made him king. It was the love they had fought for and the world they would build with it. The night stretched on, the celebrations continuing late into the evening. But for Alaric and Seraphina, the true victory had already been won. It was in the quiet moments shared between them, the soft looks, the touch of their hands, the unspoken promise of everything yet to come. They had rewritten their destinies, and as the stars sparkled above, they knew one thing for certain: the world would never be the same again. They were never destined to destroy each other. They were born to change the world together. And so ends the tale of the Moonlit Prophecy, a love story written in moonlight, war, and fate. If you believe love can rewrite destiny, don't forget to subscribe to I Love Romance Stories for more epic tales where hearts defy the impossible. Until next time, may your fates be kind and your love worth the war.